We are extremely pleased to welcome you all here in the year of the 75th anniversary of Orwell's Burmese Days. We thought at the Orwell Prize we would concentrate on Burma. We'd have it as a theme because it seemed a really important and interesting thing to do. And we've got a strange-shaped evening because we're enormously grateful to Andrew Mitchell, the Shadow Minister for Development and the MP for Sutton Coldfields, who's got to go off to all sorts of other things, but very, very kindly agreed to fit us in a really busy schedule. And I really just wanted to give him, at this very, I think, interesting and complex and delicate moment in Burma, in the history of Burma and the future of Burma, an opportunity to put forward what kind of policies you might be thinking of and what you wanted to say. And then we'll have a few questions, but he does have to leave. And we've got a car outside at 6:15, and then the evening will take another, more drunken form. But we are enormously grateful, Andrew.
Well, thank you very much. Can everyone hear me all right?
Yeah.
Thank you very much for this opportunity. I bit your hand off when you gave me the invitation. Because I care deeply about Burma. I've taken a very close interest in Burma for many years. And it seems to me an opportunity to make a few general points about conservative international development policy and something specific about Burma. And I see in the audience people with whom I've been working out for the last 4 years very directly on these issues, and indeed with whom I travel to Burma. I fear I can't say an enormous amount about Orwell. Everything I know about Orwell was gleaned from the brilliant new introduction to 1984 written by Robert Harris, a very old friend of mine, who I thought had written the most brilliant article on the amazing effect that this author, that particular book, has had. And it also gives me the opportunity to say that if you are the Shadow International Development Secretary and you're focusing and studying these things, you realise the incredible importance of radio and journalism, free journalism, the work that is done by journalists on trying to train journalists in the developing world so that they can hold politicians to account. It's an absolutely fundamental aspect of building civic society, which is so important in the developing world, enabling people to hold their politicians to account. How do you do that? You must have free institutions, the sinews of a free society, whether it's property rights, laws of contracting, independent judiciary, and a free press. So that's the second reason why I very much wanted to come. Now, there's a broad consensus about development across the world now. It used to be that the left thought if you put some more money on the table, you would be able to resolve poverty, and there was a sort of equation, a matrix there with the more the money, the less the poverty. And the right used to think there was no point in spending money on development because it was all embezzled and squirreled away in offshore and Swiss bank accounts. There is now an emerging consensus, and although the conservative view is not the same as the Labour view, there are great points of similarity. And our view is this, that the key thing that condemns people to remain poor is conflict, dysfunctional society. The key thing that lifts them out of poverty, helps lift them out of poverty, is wealth creation, and that aid, when spent properly, can achieve miracles. And I'm enormously proud that my party under David Cameron has made it clear that we will ring-fence the aid budget and that we will advance towards the 0.7 commitment of GNI by 2013. And I mention these 3 points because conflict is the first and most important of these. And I have travelled in trying to understand what stops conflicts from starting, once they start, how you stop them, and how you reconcile people once the conflict is over. And that's taken me to Rwanda, it's taken me to Darfur, Eritrea and Ethiopia, and to Chad to look at the way the terrible conflict in Darfur, more quiescent now, has internationalized itself across other borders. But it also took me to Burma. I was at the time the only, I think, British politician who had been into Burma. I had an unforgettable meeting with the foreign minister there, which I hope he won't ever forget, because I think these people don't hear what those of us in the free world think about the regime that's operating there, the wicked and evil junta that is operating there enough. I was able to meet these uncles from the NLD, I was able to meet some of the brilliant students in the class of '88, who many of them are now in jail since my visit and locked up. And I visited a refugee camp on the border between Thailand and Burma. The most appalling conditions I've ever seen. It is the only time in my life I have felt an almost uncontrollable urge to scream in fury at what I saw and witnessed. I could not believe that the international community could allow people to exist in these terrible circumstances on the Thai-Burmese border. Now, what should we do about this? Let me make a few micro points, and then let me make a macro point. And the first thing that we should recognise is the role of the Chinese, and we shouldn't be too negative about this. At the time of the cyclone in the Irrawaddy, the only gains that were made, the only time we were able to persuade the Burmese to allow in external support and aid was through the Chinese. And the brilliant Chinese ambassador in London, whom I go and see regularly to lobby on Burma. The first time I went to see her, she had me for breakfast, but I arrived with a stronger argument on subsequent occasions. Chinese don't like disorder. The key thing about the Chinese attitude to Burma is that it is disorder which threatens them. And I think they understand increasingly that Burma has got to change, or the very disorder they fear is going to afflict them. So I think continuing a dialogue with the Chinese, not indulging in megaphone diplomacy, but really making it clear why it's in their interest to see a more democratic regime in Burma is enormously important. I think there are things that we can do, which we don't always talk about, through Britain's aid effort. We have said for some years that we want the aid effort into Burma and into the border areas quadruple. The government has increased it, and if we win the next election, we will very rapidly try and scale up that work that is being done without damaging the effort that's going on inside the country to build up some of these sinews of civic society that I was talking about. We have in the Conservative Party championed the cause of human rights. William Hague has spoken out very specifically about Burma being probably the worst regime in the world today. That's what our human rights report said. And of course, many of you will know the wonderful Zoya Phan, who has spoken 2 years running at the Conservative Party conference to push home this point. And I think that helping to make the point that Aung San Suu Kyi makes, that moving the politicians into their rightful place in Burmese society and moving the military into their rightful place is not going to happen overnight. And I was very impressed that some of the leaders of the group of students of 88 are very clear about this point, that it will take a lot of time and you need to do business with the military and confidence build on both sides so that they can gradually move back into the place that the military should be in Burmese society, and the politicians can exercise their role. So those were the sort of micro points I wanted to make. I think that the British government, along with others, should be very firm in pressing every way they can for these limited bits of progress to be made to build confidence so that the overall picture on the Constitution and on the forthcoming referendum arrangements actually take place. The other thing I think the British government can do, and again this is a more micro approach, is to say to the Indian government, and indeed to the Thais, that they need to do more to help the Burmese people who live under this terrible oppression. India is the largest democracy in the world. They will be hosting the Commonwealth Games next year. We need to persuade our Indian friends and colleagues that they should be saying much more about what is happening right on their border in Burma, and to say the same thing to the Thais. Now, the final thing I wanted to say, which is the macro point, is that this marvellous policy, the responsibility to protect R2P, which Gareth Evans, the Australian Foreign Minister, managed to negotiate through the Security Council. It's terribly important. The Chinese signed up to this, to amazement from everybody, but they did sign up. And it was launched at the September meeting 2 or 3 years ago with a great sort of fanfare of excitement and backstabbing and press releases and press conferences and so on. But today it remains a bumper sticker, not a policy. And it seems to me that along with these micro matters, the international community has to make progress on this point. We allowed Rwanda to happen to our eternal shame. This policy was launched sort of while Darfur was still going on. So, straight away in the new millennium, you have a genocide, because Darfur was a genocide taking place. And then you have incidents where the responsibility to protect, if it is a policy and not a bumper sticker, can protect these people. And I had a lot of sympathy with Kushner at the time of the crisis in the Irrawaddy Delta, when he said the fact that the regime would not allow on shore the aid and support and supplies, the shelter, the food and the medicine that was in these ships just 3 miles off the coast, American ships, a British ship and French ship. The fact that the regime would not allow that aid and support on shore was a responsibility to protect issue. Now technically he is wrong, but I think all of us would say that a regime that will not look after its own people when the support is there to stop them from drowning and dying, a regime that will not embrace the international community's support is letting down those people for whom it is responsible in a completely unacceptable way. So I will rest my remarks there. I'm an optimist. I think that we can make huge progress in development in lots of places around the world. We know so much more now. There aren't dark corners. It's very interesting that only in 1988, when a group of Aung San Suu Kyi's supporters were massacred in a terrible act of butchery, it was 3 months before the rest of us knew, and the outside world knew that this had happened. And yet, when the demonstrations took place just over a year ago, we knew within seconds, all around the world, that the regime had executed this Japanese photographer because it was spotted by a mobile phone, and it was around the world within seconds. And globalization has made international development easier, not more difficult. And I am an optimist. I believe we will make progress on Burma. I think that there's a lot more the UN can do, a lot more I'm sure all of us can do. But in the end, this logjam will break, and this wonderful country that is so potentially well off, and which yet, as these demonstrations show, has so many people who are starving, will come out of this awful darkness which it is in, and back into the international community. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. I think what I'd like to do is ask our panel very quickly if they have any questions that they would. We have Derek Tonkin, who is an ex-ambassador, Pascal Putue, who's come from Sweden also to see his new baby.
No way.
So we're very pleased about that. Michael Charney, who's a historian of the era, and a member of the BBC's World Service. I don't know if you've got any immediate questions, and then I'll open it up to the floor.
I think if I might say I was an ambassador to Thailand and not to Burma. When I look around, I see 1 or 2 ex-ambassadors to Burma, and I've invited them to come and take my place, but they've decided to stay where they are. I think one of the big problems one has with development aid is that we cannot launch any IMF, ADB, World Bank program until there's a government with whom we can deal. And so we are constrained to a limited amount of aid that we can put inside the country through NGOs, through UN organizations, and particularly on the border areas. And I wondered, I don't suppose in 6 months' time the situation will have changed very much. Would you think there's a case for inviting the ADB and the IMF at least to do some preliminary study inside the country without any, it's going to take at least 12 to 18 months before they decide what it is that needs to be done?
Well, I wouldn't rule it out, but it depends upon the political events that take place in the next 6 months. There is definitely some sign of movement. I think it's hard not to be cynical about the reasons for that movement. But let's see how it plays out. There's a lot of very good work going on through the NGOs. I look very specifically at the programme to try and stop HIV/AIDS reaching epidemic proportions. At the moment, it's in danger of reaching those proportions in the vulnerable communities amongst sex workers and the gay community there. But it has been kept back by some very good work that's been done by international NGOs in educating people and helping those communities. So there is some very good work going on. There's some particularly good work going on amongst the students about how you build a fair society, which goes on largely in an understated way, and I think that's the right way to do it. And of course, the bulk of the extra money that I mentioned would go to the people who are caught in these terrible conditions on the border areas. But again, that is a palliative. It's a diplomatic solution that is required, and the internal constitutional solution. The roadmap, as it stands, will take about 100 years to deliver. It's clearly a ludicrous proposition, and all the persuasion that the Americans and the UN and the Chinese can bring to bear on that, I think, is enormously important.
Anybody else on the panel justify that? Like to ask? Michael?
No, I think it's good.
Perhaps we can. I'd just like to open it up. What I'll do is I'll take 2 or 3 questions in one go, because that would do a better chance to think. So I'll go there, there, and there. Okay. So I can't remember how I said first. You. Okay.
Susan Conway, MacArthur Project, School of Royal International Studies. Recently in the States, Professor Steinberg from Cornell said that one of the ways we couldn't afford was to offer more education programs, more scholarships, and that we really shouldn't take the line that we can't because of the issues of the state of the country, and that the way forward actually is to do more in education. I just wonder what your take on that is.
So something right at the back. Yeah.
Thank you for raising China. It strikes me that China doesn't own. So I'm Daniel Korsky. It strikes me that China isn't only looking for stability, but also access to deep sea port and raw materials. And we want so many things from China: help on Afghanistan, stability in Pakistan, in the financial system. So I'm just wondering what a conservative government would want to offer China in order to get help on an issue like that.
Yeah, I wanted to ask about China as well, actually. So I wonder if you really think they would like to see a democracy in Burma, because I think that's the last thing they want to see that.
I'll have a crack at those.
Yes.
First of all, I agree on the importance of education. I think that the critical thing, in my view, is that where you have good regional universities, the aim of these scholarships should not be to bring people back to Britain, but where often they then decide they don't want to return to their own country and help build their country, which is part of the reason for having these scholarships, to enable them to go back and make a real contribution. And also, I think it antagonises British parents who can't get their children into British universities. I think it's much better. And we've been looking at this in terms of policy towards Africa. If we're going to give scholarships, which I think are, as I say, are very important, why not boost the capacity of the East African universities, some of which are extremely good, so that they can provide those scholarships, and that may well be very good value for our taxpayers to contribute to that. And it then does avoid the 2 pitfalls which I mentioned. In terms of Burma, the clever sanctions that we impose on Zimbabwe, which Mugabe hates so much, of course, are ad hominem sanctions. They're sanctions which stop him and his cronies from travelling. And we do the same thing in Burma. I sometimes think, I'm not saying we should change the policy, but I sometimes think, actually, to let the kids travel so that they see what a terrible life their parents are responsible for in Burma would be quite a good idea, because then they'd absorb some external influences and go back and try and hold their parents to account. But at the moment, the policy covers both the parents and the children. So the importance of education is enormous. Then Daniel and the gentleman front asked about China. First of all, do the Chinese want democracy in Burma? No. Do they want disorder and instability in Burma? absolutely not. And they fear disorder and disability more than they do democracy. The Chinese have a very strong view about not interfering in other countries. That's what colours their perception. What should we do about it? We should have dialogue with them. You know, the issue of Hong Kong is long gone. We are partners with them. That's why, you know, we said we wouldn't give them any aid. China got nearly £60 million of British taxpayers' money last year. That is completely indefensible. But we should partner with them. We should try and find some joint projects where they put in some money and we put in some money into a country that we both of us are interested in and care about. And we were looking hard at that possibility if we win the next election. So partnering with China, talking to them, persuading them that this is not something that is in Britain's or the West's interest, but in everybody's interest to make progress on these issues of human rights is in their interest too, and you know, hopefully we make some progress. I don't think that the history of the last few years is one which says the Chinese have stonewalled us on all these issues. I think that we are making progress and we must make much more.
I'll do another little set of questions. You.
Alan Davis, Head of Asia, Institute for Autism Reporting. I was last in Burma just last month, and incidentally I thought your YouTube presentations were very, very good. Basically, a question about Burma, but also about DFID, because I used to be a DFID media consultant. Should the DFID aid be a bit more political, in your view, given it's got lots of money, but as you say, possibly it's not engaging as much as it could be in terms of conflict? And as I say, in Burma, in terms of civil society, the Foreign Office is much more political, it doesn't have the funds. So if the Conservatives were to be elected next year, would they make DFID a bit more political and not simply focus on poverty reduction, but actually change in countries which need change?
We made a film when we were in Burma, which is quite long, so we chopped it up into 3 parts. It wasn't too tedious people watching it. It's a little dated now, but I think it's a reasonable contribution to the debate. Would DFID be more political under us? I think DFID would be more wired up with the Foreign Office, because development is about diplomacy, defence and development. And you need to wire them together more, and DFID needs a bit more private sector and classic civil service DNA, and perhaps a little bit less NGO DNA. So I think it would be more political in that sense. Of course, the rules governing the Point 7 and the money side are very clearly laid down by the DAC in Paris. And, you know, that is a matter of record. I think the point I would make is that the focus on poverty, and the Act is brilliantly drafted in that respect, is a very wide focus. You know, was the Sierra Leone operation, which I think was the best thing that Blair did at his time as Prime Minister, was that not a pro-poverty act? You know, these people were dying naked under the hedges outside Freetown, formerly very successful country, and we rescued these people from the most appalling situation. So I think, you know, the pro-poverty point can sometimes be too narrowly interpreted. On cross-border aid, we are absolutely committed to making as much funding available within the envelope I described, budget envelope I described, to try and help these poor people who I saw in these camps. This was a camp where there was a river running through the middle of it. The Burmese army were about 3 kilometres away. They were separated by mines from these poor people in this camp. There were people coming in every day. I heard stories about the way they've been treated, which, and I've heard these stories all over the world in refugee camps, which were just unique in their horror of what people can do to each other. And we would try and find ways whereby there could be some basic education in those camps, there could be some clean water, and a little healthcare as well. Very, very basic. And through the NGOs and through others, I think we can try and do something to help these people who are living, as I say, in the most ghastly circumstances.
I'll just take a couple more. I'll take 3 more quick questions. I'm just about time, if that's okay. You, because I forgot to put 1, 2, and 3 at the back. Yeah.
Very briefly, Martin Morgan. I was ambassador there in 1988. I'm a friend of Aung San Suu Kyi's. On education, I'm chairman of the charity called Prospect Burma, which has already sent 1,000 Burmese over the years to universities almost all in the region, who promised to go back and help restore things. I think I'm moving on to the next week. Try to persuade you to promise that, unlike the present government, a Conservative government would give us a bit of money. They refuse to do anything tonight for doctrinal reasons, which I don't entirely understand.
You've mentioned at the beginning, stressed the importance of the media, radio, and this country is particularly known for restricting the media, and also the government has a open policy found out the media by the government data, meaning media found out by the Burmese media. So in terms of developing the media, as we know, only a few foreign broadcast stations, including BBC, where I work. I wonder if you can tell us about your policy and
Specifically on the media point.
yeah, the media point and the development in terms of media.
My name is Mr. Bellman. I'm a SOAS graduate. I just have an ongoing interest in Burma. I'd just like to return to the China question. I'm just wondering as to whether there might be a strategic conflict of interests in that in 2015, ASEAN will be having a form of economic community that many of the foreign offices are interested in, and it's meant to emulate the European policy of Paris region. Now, as Burma is thorn in the side of ASEAN further developing a sense of cohesion, is it not possibly also in China's interest to kind of hold back Western, US, and EU strategic interests in Southeast Asia by maintaining a certain degree of disorder within Burma, or should I say to maintain a thorn in the side of ASEAN to keep the US and the EU out? Is that there?
On the last question, I don't think so. I think that, again, your point about disorder, I both my earlier response to that, I think ASEAN is pretty supine about the Singaporeans issued a wonderful statement after the monks were attacked, but the other ASEAN members got them within a week and it had all been watered down. And I went to talk, shortly after I went to talk to the Singaporean foreign minister. It was clear that they'd been got at by the other ASEAN countries and told they were way too far out in front and they should break themselves back. So I think that as ASEAN moves very slowly indeed, I hope I proved wrong about that. Then the issue about the media. I was talking yesterday to the new head of the World Service, who and I was asking him about Burma, and I was asking him how much resource they're putting in. Burmese don't have the technology to jam the BBC, so BBC, I believe, plays a very important part in getting information across in Burma. And I made a point to him that we would want to support that work, and that we regard the BBC World Service, which does some brilliant stuff all around the world, as very, very important to development indeed. The radio was used in Rwanda, for example, in a most terrible way to lift the boiling point of the population so that violence and genocide could take place. And the power of radio can go either way, but when it is used well, I think it is incredibly important for building civic society, and it's in that context that we see it. Finally, Martin's question about Prospect Burma. I'm pleased to be able to tell you that if you look at our green paper, which David and I launched in Islington in the summer, and which we just published as a pamphlet, you will see that we intend to set up a specific fund called an impact fund, which says to organisations like yours, NGOs, if by receiving a chunk of taxpayers' money, you can say match funding funds that you raise, you can double the output of what you are achieving. The current government is much too interested in inputs, which is putting money on the table. We're interested in outputs and outcomes, what you actually achieve with that money. If you can demonstrate that by match funding your income, you will double your outputs, then so long as we're happy about the probity of your accounts and we can see that it's genuine, there'll be very light touch regulation. You go off and do it, come back and tell us in 2 or 3 years how you've got on, and then if you've done what you said you'd do, you'll be eligible for further funding. So in terms of what you described yourself as doing, I would think you are eligible for the impact fund if we win the next election and if we have a chance to introduce it. So I guess we'll have a look at the green paper and let me have any thoughts that you may have as a result.
I'd like to thank Andrew very, very much for giving us actually some very interesting thoughts forward, and just that general sense that Burma, there are possibilities in Burma that there haven't been over the last 5 or 6 years. And I think you extended the range of the levers that we and other countries need to pull, particularly actually India, it seems to me. And I'd like to thank you very much indeed for coming and giving us a bit of your time. Hello. What I'm going to do now is this whole evening has been organised partly because it's the 75th anniversary of Orwell's Burmese Days, and this event is also the launch of this year's Orwell Prize. The Orwell, and so I'm going to tell you a bit about the prize. I'm going to tell you something very exciting about the prize. And then we're very excited, we've got Alan Cox, who's going to read a bit of dramatised material from Burmese Days, done by Dominic Cavendish for us. I do hope that you'll look at Julio Eckhart's wonderful pictures of Burma, which are on the walls. And there's more of his work, and also all sorts of literary pieces of work about Burma. We've got some essays, some extra essays, on our Orwell Prize website. At the Orwell Prize, we do argument and we do debate, and we have taken argument and debate all over the country, but we also essentially do good, plain writing about radical ideas. And everything we do is really around the trying to advance Orwell's ambition to turn political writing into an art. We'd like to very much thank the people that make it possible, one of which are sponsors. We have so much less money than any other book prize you have ever seen. Whenever we tell any other book prize how much money we have, the organiser tends to have to faint. But we reckon, actually, I think we should apply for a government grant, the next government grant, because our impact for money is very, very high. So I can certainly, I think I'm in there. We have 3 really main sponsors, one of which is the Media Standards Trust, which has produced some very interesting work this year on the PCC. The second is the Political Quarterly, which is a very good and just and wonderful magazine which was set up in the 1930s, and which also exists to promote, as it were, politics and good thinking about politics, edited by the Admirable Tony Wright, one of those MPs that you can really hug. And by Richard Blair, who's Orwell's son, and a little bit of money from the Orwell Trust. So we would like to thank them, because none of this would happen without them. And Reuters gives us, again, a small amount of money, which we are enormously grateful for. And all of those sponsors we feel extremely happy with. We feel that Orwell would have been happy with them, so we're very grateful to them. What I want to do this year is just tell you a little bit about what's going to happen over the year. Last year, Sir Bernard Crick, who set the prize up, died. Bernard was a difficult man of enormous capacity, who went around creating political institutions. He helped select committees to be set up. He set up the Politics Association. He set up the Orwell Prize. He did a lot around citizenship. And he wrote the most wonderful biography of George Orwell. And we're very sad that he died last year, but I think he'd be happy. Well, he'd never be happy with anything I did, so perhaps he'd be happy. And we know very much that the quality of the prize, which last year I think reached, really, we were very pleased with the prize we got last year, entirely depends on the judges. The judges are the people that make up their minds. And so I want to just tell you who the judges this year are going to be. This year, the book prize the judges are going to be Jonathan Hayward, who runs English Pen, Francine Stock, the BBC broadcaster and novelist, and Andrew Holgate from the Sunday Times, the literary editor. On the Journalism Prize, we have our own Peter Kellner from YouGov, who's going to be judging the Journalism Prize, along with Roger Grafe, the great documentary maker. So we are very, very grateful to them. Last year, we started a one-off blog prize, and we hit, and the blogger who was chosen was a serving policeman called Richard Horton, who, as the blogger Jack Knight, wrote a series of extremely, really it's a kind of new kind of reporting, very vigorous reports from the front line of contemporary policing. What was then very interesting is that the Times decided to out him, and then we had a landmark legal case in which Justice Eadie, friend of all known journalists who want to say something, decided that his name should be published, and we were quite anxious about Richard's job, actually. But the police managed to put him through the ringer very fast. Anyway, so we thought that we would therefore run a blog prize as part of our normal part of blogging, because in some sense it has entered the political sphere. And the two judges this year for the blog prize are Una King and Richard Horton, Jack Knight, who couldn't come tonight, but who is, I can tell you, an extraordinary man of great integrity and great simplicity. So we're very excited that Richard is going to be our blog prize judge this year. Orwell is a wonderful prize to run because it is about politics, but he did great novels, great fiction writing, as well as great reporting and great essays in that long English tradition of scepticism. And we are really excited tonight that we've got to launch us in a proper Orwellian way, as it were, a reading from Burmese Days, an incident in Rangoon, which was written by Dominic Sambrook, and Alan Cox, who you may have last seen in Frost Nixon, but who I saw in a wonderful series of Orwell-based plays in the summer, is going to start us off with a bit that takes us straight back to Orwell's own, as it were, Burma in the 1930s. Thank you.
An incident in Rangoon, handwritten in pencil. Here for a while I abandon autobiography and commence fiction writing. That is, the main facts of the story here told are known to me, and I have supplied the rest out of my imagination. I take so much trouble because this chain of events led to my downfall. Not, however, by any real poetic justice, but simply through coincidence. Nevertheless, I am, after all, here in Nyorn-Gleben through my own fault. For if this mischance had not come my way, there was bound to have been some other. My own temperament and way of living had made sure that I would fall into any trap of this kind that fortune laid me. One night then, soon after, I went to Kyorktada. I called for poker dice in the club. Lackerstein and I were arguing about who should call for drinks, each maintaining that it was his own turn. Very well, said I, we'll toss for it. The winner calls. Boy, bring poker dice. No poker dice, sir. What, no poker dice? No, sir. Last Secretary Saab stopping, sir. Secretary Saab telling me throwing away poker dice, sir. Damned high-handed action. The next day, I ordered a set from Rangoon. The evening of the day they arrived was an evening of torrential rain, which hammered onto the roofs with deafening and dreary persistence. It was the last onslaught of wet weather. As I got into my car to go to the club, I remembered the poker dice and took them along with me. I found the club empty, and spent a dismal hour smoking cigarettes and reading the shiny papers while the stupid rain still poured down out of the skies. At 8 o'clock, it cleared up suddenly, and at 1:15, when I was about to shout for my car, Tian Shui came in, and we had a drink together. Tian Shui began fingering the leather dice box. "What is this for, please, Mr. Flory?" "It is a game," I said, "designed for men whose mens are unequal to the strain of thought." "How do you play it, yet?" I explained the game, and Tian Shui began to tell me of how much he had wanted to go to the races in Rangoon on Saturday, and how much he feared that his father would never give him the money. Besides, his father was going to Rangoon himself tomorrow. This was Wednesday. And life altogether was difficult for the gay sons of pious fathers. Then he produced all the money he had in the world, which was 5 rupees, and we began to throw the dice at a rupee a throw. I had no money on me, but I played with matches, and at the end sent Koshla home in the car for money. Tian Shui's luck was astounding, and he threw 5 aces more than a dozen times in the evening. When he had won 35 rupees off me, I threw him double or quits, and he won again. After this, we both went home. How much I wish I could tell this as the tale of a young man's ruin, and how I, the tempter, sowed the fatal passion in his breast, and thereby reaped the bitter crop of my own undoing. It is much more satisfying to trace one's fate to a single sin, rather than to weakness and native idiocy. But a man's acts are not thus significant and separable, and though in outward seeming they make up the history of his life, they are in truth only the byproducts of the greater life which goes on in his mind and spirit. The fact which matters is not that I supply Tian Shui with money to gamble, and that his gambling led by chance to the detection of my misdeeds, that I was a fool and a scoundrel who must have destroyed himself, not in one way, then in another. Besides, I never taught Tian Shui to gamble, like most Mongolians who did not need teaching. It is a native taste of the people, as drunkenness is with us. Next morning, Bar Sane came to the office with a sad face and a grimy sheet of ruled notepaper which said that his little brother was dying and he must come to Rangoon at once. So I asked him about the little brother, and Bar Sane told me he was a boy of rare promise, but a few years back he had shown the signs of consumption, and they had sent him to the Shan states in hopes of curing him. This and the doctor's bills were a great strain on the family, and Bar Sane himself had had to leave the shop where he was learning engineering to take up a clerkship. The little brother grew better, and they sent him from place to place, never abandoning home. At one time, he stayed with Bar Sane himself. Bar Sane, though he worked all day, often had to stay half the night at the sick boy's bedside. So, he was tired at his work and was dismissed from that office for idleness. And there was a long period of months when the brother grew rapidly worse for lack of comforts and medicine. And now, as a last hope, they had brought him to the Rangoon hospital. But it was of no use, and Bar Sane wished only to see his brother alive the last time and close his eyes when they could see no more. I knew all this was a lie and stopped it. But I thought how sad it would have been if true. And how painful it must be to confine one's sorrows between a Friday and a Monday and then come back to the brisk and banal tasks of an office. I was touched by the quiet stoicism with which Bar Sane faced his quite imaginary misfortunes. And I gave him 2 days leave and 30 rupees advance from his pay. So, when Bar Sane and Tian Shui set out for Rangoon on Friday, they had about 100 rupees between them. And as they travelled as deck passengers, nearly all this was left them to bet with. They had gone to Rangoon on Saturday morning and at once went along to the house of Barsane's uncle, where they were going to stay. The uncle was a head clerk in the government office, drawing about 200 rupees a month. He had a nice house in Kemendine and a daughter at school who talked English and wore European clothes. Morning after morning, he ate his breakfast at 8:30, twisted up his long hair under a pink silk gongbang, and ran for the tram with a black cheroot in his mouth. On Sundays, he took his wife and daughter to the zoo, or the park, and sometimes a football match on Saturdays. On public holidays, he went to the pagoda to pray and watch the fuse. He was a man of exemplary character, but like many elderly Burmans, he liked to believe that he had been a lukhumike, a bold blade in his youth, and had led a terrible life of gambling and women. When the two men arrived and said they were going to the races, he told them of how he had once won 2,000 rupees and spent it all in a fortnight. Then he hurried away to the office as usual. Chen Shui and Barsane went to the races, and by some astounding chance, won 5,000 rupees. About 2/3 of this belonged to Chen Shui. They were rendered almost delirious by their good fortune, and were ready to listen to any scheme for burning money. They fell in with a Burman who wanted to sell a motor bicycle and sidecar, and demanded a trial run along the Prom Road. 6 miles out, the back tyre was ripped off and the inner tube split in half. The owner of the bicycle had no spare tube. Tian Shui and Barsane had never meant to buy the machine, and they hailed a taxi that was passing and went back to Rangoon. The owner of the bicycle was left on the road, almost weeping at his loss and disappointment. But the two millionaires had no pity for him. They struck up a friendship with the driver of the taxi, and he took them to a Chinese eating shop where they all had dinner. Then, to begin the evening, Tian Shui led the way to a restaurant patronized mostly by Europeans, and going in, called for beer. The proprietor, the European guests, and the bar boys all looked askance at the two Burmans. They could do nothing. Tian Shui was defiant in manner, but Barsane was rather timid until after his second beer. After their second beer, Tian Shui called for brandy cocktails, and they drank 2 each. Barsane then bought a tin of cigarettes and began to offer them to all the men in the bar. The white men all refused, rather offensively, except for a young boy just out from home who was too bashful to not accept. Tian Shui clapped him on the shoulder and said he was a jolly good fellow. Then he suddenly began to sing, "For he's a jolly good fellow." The boy blushed and looked acutely miserable, and a young man with fair hair walked across to Tian Shui and said, "You'd better clear out of here, or I'll put you out myself." "Who the hell are you?" cried Tian Shui. The man with the fair hair caught him by the shoulder and began to push him to the door. Tian Shui broke loose and would have struck him, but the other white men intervened, and the two Burmans were ejected. Then they got into their taxi again and went off to a low dive where they drank beehive brandy. After an hour of this, they asked the taxi driver to show them the way to some women. And he replied that it was late at night, but he would do his best. The car moved eastwards through the now quiet streets and finally halted in a little evil-smelling alley full of shuttered houses, dimly lighted within. The taxi driver went up to one of the houses, knocked on the door, and began to call out, "Gopa! Gopa! Hey, Gopa!" After 2 or 3 minutes, as there was no response, he knocked with all his might, at which a dog began an angry yelping, and a woman's voice from within suddenly screamed out, as though in terror, "Who's that?" The taxi driver said something in a reassuring tone, and after somebody had looked out of an upper window, the door opened, and an enormously fat man came out, carrying a lantern in his hand. The lantern showed a bedraggled dead rat lying on the doorstep, and shone dimly upon the man's huge belly, for he was half naked, and his great pock-marked face. He was scratching his side with his free hand, and though apparently half asleep, he was chewing betel. His front teeth were mostly gold, and thus, with the betel juice, gleamed an unearthly red in the lamp. After a few words with the taxi driver, he called to someone within, and then sat on his heels, giving many noisy yawns. Presently, an old woman appeared, and then a thin boy, blind in one eye, but with a sweet, childlike face. The boy was sent off somewhere on a bicycle, and the others sat down to wait. The stench of the dead rat seemed to grow stronger each minute, and the cur never ceased to yelp and snarl. Jiang Shui, Ba Sein, the driver, and the boards were all half dead with sleep. In about 20 minutes, a young woman in a blue longyi came down the road, rubbing the sleet out of her eyes and grumbling at the lateness of the hour. The one-eyed boy explained that this was the only girl he could get. The others, he said, had all gone out somewhere. Jiang Shui now became a little more alert and began to ask who lived in all the houses round about. It appeared they were mostly prostitutes. "Who lives in that house?" he asked, pointing at a little house a little way down the road, which, though shuttered up, appeared to be brightly lighted within. "Ah, there is nothing doing there. That's the second wife of a diamond merchant from Mulnain. He's a very rich man." "Well, so am I. I'm going into that house." "There is nothing doing, I tell you." But Jiang Shui was in a perverse and drunken mood. "Drive the car down opposite the house," he said. "I'm going to have a look inside." "Ah, Malay, he is mad," protested the driver. "Go on, drive it down. What are you afraid of?" The driver obeyed, though he was now growing a little sulky. The fare had run up to more than 60 rupees, and he was not quite certain of getting it. When they were opposite the house, Jiang Shui climbed onto the top of the car and leaned against the window shutters at the top of which was a broad crack of light. Here for a moment, he swayed drunkenly, and his head rolled heavily upon his breast. But he recovered himself and stared into the room. It was much like many other Burmese rooms in Rangoon. The floor was covered with mats, but there was little European furniture, namely 2 or 3 straight-backed chairs and a round table, all covered with cloths of Burmese lacework. There was a bowl of roses on the table, a grandfather clock, not going, and shrine, also covered with lace, with 3 candles burning. Framed advertisements for Japanese beer hung on the walls, and a petrol lamp from the ceiling. What Jiang Shui looked at, however, was a girl sitting on the mats, smoking a cigarette. She was wearing a longyi, pale blue flowered Chinese satin, and had many gold ornaments on her wrists and about her neck. She was possibly 19 years old, had an oval face of fair complexion, very elegant and calm, but with a hard, mercenary expression. She looked rather like an evil-minded doll. But Jiang Shui was in a strange mood between drunkenness and sleep, so that lust moved him with a peculiar, heavy power. At this moment, the girl seemed to him the most desirable in the world, and her cold face and rich clothes seemed to double her value. He determined that by hook or by crook, the girl must be his, and that for him to lose her would be simply an absurd injustice. He felt that he had a first call upon all living women, and that any woman must submit to him if he would only exert his power. So he began to scheme how he should enter the house. When that was done, he felt the battle was over. But at this moment, A door in the room opened, and Tian Shui saw his rival face to face. An old man with a sad and noble face, grey hair, gallantly knotted. Took a cigarette from the girl's mouth and sat down beside her. Vergiss and vice and charity, for lack and fly for shame. Old men will do it. Jiang Shui swayed on the car and almost fell. The diamond merchant from Mool Mine was his venerable father.
With the tricks and the unpleasantness and the sinisterness and the unexpectedness. Thank you very much indeed. We're now going. So it's a bit like Christmas lunch, actually. And the next course is the one you've really come for. We're now we've got a very distinguished panel, and I'm very grateful to all of them. And they're going to introduce initial views about Burma and what the way forward is, and then we'll open it up again to the audience. The first person is Derek Tonkin. He was our ambassador in Thailand and Vietnam, and I'm sorry if I gave you Burma as well. Pascal Hu Thuy, who wrote a wonderful book, From the Land of the Green Ghosts, and who has a most extraordinary story. And we've got So Win Than from the Burmese World Service, which, despite Andrew Mitchell apparently is about to be cut, but we're very, very pleased to have somebody from the Burmese section of the World Service. The World Service is indeed, I feel, something that Orwell would have approved of and does amazing work all over. But I think particularly it has a particularly interesting role in Burma. And I'd like to start with Derek.
For the past few years, British policy on Burma has been almost entirely controlled by the Prime Minister himself, who has this, I'd almost call it obsession, with Aung San Suu Kyi. Now, I've only met her once. Martin has met her several times. And I can tell you, it's very difficult not to become obsessed with her, because she is such a charismatic personality. However, it's not enabled us to make any progress at all in resolving the situation in Burma, until quite recently, when the Americans took the initiative. We're grateful that George Bush has gone, because Obama has said, and Hillary Clinton in particular, that we can now have another look at our policy and see what can be done. It's taken them 7 months. They've decided that, in fact, they're not going to review their policy at all, but they are prepared to talk, and they are prepared to open a dialogue with the Burmese. So far, the Burmese have reacted quite favourably. I think what Senator Webb did in going there, although he was much criticised by the Burmese community overseas, helped to set the ball rolling. And since then, the administration has completed its review. And what they have said is, Kurt Campbell's words, and he repeated this on several occasions, what we want is a unified, peaceful, prosperous, and democratic Burma. And I would think that probably all of us in this room would agree with that. The problem is how to reach this. Now, the Americans have offered to start talks. They still don't know who is going to be the interlocutor on the Burmese side. Kurt Campbell is saying that he hopes to go in the near future. If he does go, he will want to see senior people, Aung San Suu Kyi, and will try to get some kind of process going. I must say, I'm not very hopeful in the short term. I don't believe that they will make any progress at all politically until after the elections. And so what that means is that I think it's unlikely that there's going to be any substantive discussions at all on political issues, political reform, human rights, and so on. They will touch on these issues, But I can't see that the regime will make any concessions at all. I don't think they're prepared to amend in any way the constitution, which they regard as a fait accompli. Their main objective now is to get the elections through, and I think they will concentrate on that. There are many other things that the Americans can talk to the Burmese about. There are problems of narcotics, there are problems of piracy, cross-border refugees, HIV/AIDS, accounting for American airmen who were lost. Those are things that I think can be used as confidence-building measures, but on the more substantive issues of political reform, I think it is going to take a long time. And I think what the Burmese now want to do is to seek to co-opt the NLD and Aung San Suu Kyi, if they possibly can, into agreeing to take part in the elections in some way or other. This is exceptionally difficult, because political parties will have to be re-registered. In order to register, they will have to say that they support the Constitution, and if they don't, they won't be allowed to register. And so that puts the NLD in a tremendous dilemma. Particularly, they issued their Shuigondam declaration at the end of April, in which they set out essential priorities: release of all political prisoners, secondly, amendment of the Constitution. And only yesterday, Win Tin was saying that one of the clauses that they insisted on amending would be the one that gave the military a leading role in the political life of the country. Well, to be quite honest, I can't see the military agreeing to any of this at all. They have forced their constitution through in a referendum that was clearly dictated by the military. They are going to control whoever will stand part in the elections, the political parties, and so in a sense the results of the elections are already a fait accompli. And to compensate for that, they will try to make the actual voting on the day as free and fair and as uncontroversial as possible. Whereupon I'm afraid our friends in ASEAN will say, you see, it's all worked out perfectly all right, we can now relax. And there are signs that ASEAN are already relaxing, because at the ASEAN summit recently, they only put forward a very short paragraph on Burma, in which they said, we underscored the importance of achieving national reconciliation, and that the general elections to be held in Myanmar in 2010 must be conducted in a free, fair, inclusive and transparent manner in order to be credible to the international community. Well, what I think is, it will be reasonably free and fair and transparent, but it certainly won't be inclusive. And I think my interest is in what exactly is going to happen during the next 6 months with the NLD, and will they be able to reach some kind of understanding with the regime which will allow them to take part in elections. There are various formula I could suggest, but I'm not Burmese and I have to leave it to them to decide what to do. But there might be declarations on both sides, there might be some kind of concordat, though that could be agreed. But in the short term, I'm not really hopeful that anything much will happen. What I'm also interested in at the moment is what the European community are going to do. Because practically every country in ASEAN, even China, Russia, Australia, New Zealand, Japan, South Korea, India, have said that the change of heart by the Americans, the understanding agreement to go to dialogue is a good thing. So far, I've not noticed, apart from a mild explosion by Bernard Kouchner, that any European statesman has said anything. And I think this is very unfortunate. One would have expected by now that the Swedish presidency would have said something, that Carl Bildt would have said, yes, we welcome this move. But in fact, he's not said anything. And it may be his eyes are focused more on the Lisbon Treaty and possible appointments that there might be. I'm told he has a particular interest in this Gilbert and Sullivan, High Representative of the Union for Security and Political Policy. Well, it's all very unfortunate. There is a meeting on the 16th and 17th of November of European foreign ministers, and I do hope that then they will make some announcement. But so far there's been no announcement. There are vague rumours from Brussels that the British are being difficult. I would rather expect them to be difficult because they simply don't trust the Burmese in the way they're going. So if we're looking at the future, what I would say, and it's something that I tried to raise with Andrew Mitchell, first of all, I think there are a number of sanctions that should be removed straight away. And these are, for example, the ban on international financial institutions actually going to Burma to find out what's going on, the restriction on ADB, IMF, and World Bank funding is directed at the Burmese people. It has nothing to do with the regime's plans. It accounts for, in my estimate, 90% of the financial disadvantage that the Burmese people at present suffer. Because the figures show that Burma is right at the bottom of the list of development aid, with only $4 per person per year, compared with an average of 42 for developing countries. Cambodia, 48, Vietnam, 68, and so on and so forth. And whichever list you take, whether it's the OECD list of fragile states, they're at the bottom of 38, whether it's the UN's list of 55 less developed countries, they're at the bottom of 55. And until somehow you can resolve that problem, Burma is not going to progress. There are other things that I think are slightly ridiculous. For example, in February last year, the European Community decided to ban trade in timber, precious metals, and precious stones. There has never been any significant trade in timber here. There are 200,000 sawmills in China and Thailand waiting to take every log of Burmese timber that can go that way. And the only people who've suffered have been the furniture manufacturers, particularly some who are strong supporters of Aung San Suu Kyi. Indeed, one of the lists of indicted companies consists of 1,207 Burmese enterprises, of whom I would say 80% are supporters of freedom and democracy. And why have they been included? Not because they're regime or military or army, but simply because, unfortunately, they're in the wrong sectors. They're jewelry merchants, or jewelry shops, or furniture manufacturers. And I really do find it's extraordinary. And I did ask the former minister, Bill Rammell, whether he would do anything about this. He said yes, he would, but of course he hasn't. And so, you know, if you go through the detail of it, there are a number of things that could be done now. But on the broader issue of whether there's going to be any serious political change in the next 6 months before the elections, whenever they're held, my feeling is probably no. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think you hold on to it. I think you're there. Thank you very much, Derek. We've now got a huge list of people that we want to bring pressure, and we'd like our government to be less stupid. But so you know, that's a good start. Pascal, what would you think were the most important things to happen?
It's very difficult when either you are Burmese or someone who supports the Burmese cause to be unemotional and also sentimental about the country. And as far as I know, including quite a lot of Burmese exile communities, they tend to be, their emotional scale tends to go ups and down quite quickly. And when I'm thinking back 20 years ago, in 1988, when we started to take part in the protest, the idea was just basic freedom. There was no sanction, there was no boycotting. What we wanted was to live decently. And I think 20 years later, I think the same, because Burma is betrayed by the international community. But when they don't want to admit that, because the reason is Burma has no threat to the international community. It has no, they are, including the shadow minister himself, was saying they have to talk to the Chinese, as if Burma is the Chinese Republic of Burma. So that is very sad for me, and I find it sometimes quite angry, to be honest. But having said that, having seen quite a lot of things going on in the 20 years, I think that Burma doesn't need, or Burma won't be able to solve its problem in terms of by just arguing against sanction or pro-sanction. It's much more to do with what can you do, what will you do. And I think that election, so-called that mooted election, 2010, is an embarrassment for all, because the failure is kind of trying to cover the failure of the 20 years, and everyone pushing you to take part in it. And I have no, I don't think, I definitely believe that the 2010 election will solve anything or improve Burmese life. But what I do think is Burma will change. And I have a feeling that the election could also trigger something that the junta doesn't want. So it might be in some way but impossible to say. But one thing I can definitely say the moment is the election is likely to be the time when, if they're going to hold an election next year, 2010, it's going to be around the World Cup when the camera is pointing the other side. Like they did with the Constitution. They deliberately use those kind of opportunities to bungle everything, because the army and also quite a lot of their supporters have no confidence. And I think it's to do with our historical lack of confidence in ourselves. I don't mean the Burmans only, including the ethnics and everyone, because it is a country that has been created from the boundaries where people are squeezed out, and also it's also to do with they're connected to many countries, mostly powerful countries, and that's what the Burmese proverbs say is eating like a crow behavior. We still have that. Jilang sa zare, we say that, and that is very hard to get rid of. And not, if you look even under UNU's government in the 50s, there was always the element of creating an enemy for yourself so that you can become a leader. So the junta is still using that idea of the West as their enemy. That's why they're building tunnels. They are trying to get technological advancement from North Korea about nuclear. And I know that they know that the West won't come and attack them, because there's no oil enough for the West to come and attack directly. The West is likely to use China and India to get oil from them. So there's a kind of masquerade going on. But on the other hand, the encouraging thing over the 20 years, the past 20 years, is what Martin was saying about what they've been doing to re-educate people, allowing them to do that, to get more, and for the country. And I'm sure, I think 90%, to say the least, including myself, will go back to Burma to help the country. The only problem is the countries that can support us won't support us the things they should be supporting. They're just talking about sanctions, they're talking about this and that. And there's no, if you look on the ground, for example, like help given to Nagis, Cyclone Nagis. We now know the report said that 60% of the help are monitored. So sometimes what they do is, if the money is small enough, they just chuck the money and go away. That's what we feel. But I don't think that it is a kind of despairing situation. I don't feel that either. I feel that if you really want to help, or if you are in a position to help, please help us in a way that give us the dignity. Don't make us And quite a lot of people, Burmese people, they are artists, they are, as Derek was saying, many people are just doing the business. But quite a lot of things, Burmese people feel that they've been trodden on before giving the money. So, and lastly, I think too many things have been said about what should be done on Burma, and only small bit done. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. I think it was very, very eloquent description, actually, of the uncertainty. I mean, what you did was say the elections were, everybody's agreed that the elections won't be real, but there is an opportunity in the elections. That's
what we like to think.
And that opportunity.
But we know that it's only for the, to propagate military dictatorship more, because they accumulated their own problems to make it happen.
Thank you very, very much. Michael, can you give us a bit of historical?
Well, I wouldn't go back too far. One point I'd really like to make is that I think that the big opportunity for the international community to have stepped in and helped things in Burma would have been between 1988 and 1990, between the time when they had the protests in the streets and the collapse of the BSPP government, and the total, the military showed it couldn't run things. The last constitution they had showed that it couldn't work. They couldn't manage the economy. Everything just collapsed. And that was the real opportunity for people to step in, but nobody stepped in. Well, people, the outside world did step in, but they came in to invest and open up businesses and everything else. When the big push for sanctions, the call for the introduction of sanctions, that didn't come until the mid-1990s. So the big embarrassing situation, I think, for the world, and the big disappointing thing for me, is to have watched over the past 20 years as the military has step by step entrenched its power, entrenched its position, and everybody stood at a distance and introduced basically meaningless sanctions. Burma was never so dependent on foreign trade. It only made up like 8% of its economy. And the way in which it was slowly, in graduated steps introduced, anything any damage it could have done, the Burmese regime could have adjusted for. Those people who were really hurt were people like female textile workers who were then forced into prostitution. Another aspect of all of this is we keep on talking about whether or not this constitution will work, and Aung San Suu Kyi and the NLD. But when we talk about these things, we ask, and I totally sympathize with her position. But when we talk about these things, we're always keeping the discussion on the issue of democracy or not democracy, rather than a whole host of problems underneath the scenes, such as the relationship between the Burmese and the ethnic minorities, and the place of the ethnic minorities in the next government. The other thing I'm concerned about is and I'm divided on this as well, is that the Constitution will present some kind of opportunities, and it's some small step, some way that some change can occur. And the Burmese can, the role of the military, it won't be 100%, maybe it'll be like 25% now. But I'm also concerned about provisions in the Constitution which will forgive the military for what they've done in the past 20 years. For all the atrocities will be forgiven because they cannot be held accountable for that because they did that in support of the government. And I think these are some of the issues that I think are most, that I had the most concern for. But it's unclear how all this will play out.
Thank you very, very much for that. And also, lost opportunities are always interesting because you can learn from them. I'd like to turn to you, Selwyn. It seems to me that what we're looking at is actually, it's always interesting to think what are the things that spur interest in the country, whose problems endure. And there is greater interest, and it seems to be the American initiative, which was unexpected perhaps, does start to open up all sorts of possibilities. The absolute action of the Burmese people also was the absolute foundation of this current resurgence of interest. How difficult is it to report into it, and how difficult is it to find out and to report out of it from the World Service point of view?
I had been a journalist inside Burma with the Ministry of Information for 7 years, and then I left the country in 2000, and I've been with the BBC for 9 years. So I had the experience of reporting or working as a journalist inside Burma and outside, currently reporting on Burma from outside as well. reporting on Burma at best of times, it could be described as very difficult. At worst of times, it seems impossible because we are not allowed to go inside Burma. We are barred, and regime attitude is very hostile. And when you look at the state-run newspapers on the back page, then with a very big lines, almost every day attacking us, BBC. We are liars, we are slanderers, ex-handlers, you name it. They have list of names, not very nice names for us. And they also, Andrew Mitchell earlier mentioned that they no more try to block the airwaves, but what they did is discourage or they threatened for the people not to listen to the foreign broadcast stations like BBC, Voice of America, Radio Free Asia, and Democratic Voice of Burma. And that makes us very difficult for because people understand the generous hatred or towards us. Then it's very difficult for us to talk to the people inside. Not only the government officials, but even the ordinary people. Even seemingly very non-controversial subject like sports. BBC has started to plan for the 2012 the London Olympics, and then we are asked to find some aspiring Olympians inside Burma who would be trained and then come and compete in the London Olympics. And then even then, it's very difficult to talk to the people at the sports ministry, because they are worried that once they speak to us and their superiors would be angry with them. So it's very, very difficult for us to talk to the people. But at the same time, we have the duty, responsibility to present the balanced view. So I think it's doing a great disservice to them, the generals, their policy. And we always invite them to come on board, come to us, and then take part in the discussions. And almost never we got anyone inside Burma. The embassy, the closest here is the embassy here. They never answer us. The ambassador is not always there. So we call it that anada, nisa, never there. So it's one of the difficulties to get people, the officials to talk to us. The fear permeates everywhere, maybe real or perceived, that people are reluctant to talk to us. It's quite ironic that the fear is so pervasive, so deep-rooted that not only inside Burma. I can give you an example. Just happened yesterday. Then there was a Burmese theatre company performed in London yesterday with Burmese students and then young people. Some of the Burmese were there. Then a DVB journalist went there to cover that event, and that journalist was trying to talk to some of the audience. Some Burmese said that, no, I can't talk because I have to go back to Burma. So the fear is everywhere, and so it could be real, because there were stories that people got into jail because under the charges that they are giving information, false information to the foreign media. So it's a difficult situation. And Bob, I was in Bangkok bureau for a year during 2007 and 2008. So I was quite lucky enough to be very close to we couldn't get inside Burma, so Bangkok was the closest, Thailand was the closest that we could go. And then two of the biggest stories broke during my stay in Thailand. First was the 2007 monks uprising. What was really encouraging was that the people, the citizen journalists, risked everything to get the information out of Burma. Unfortunately, many of our sort of sources, people who gave us the information, made contact for us to the key players, in the whole thing. They landed in jail, unfortunately, and but they were very, very keen to get the information out of Burma. So they make contact, and with the advancement of technology, introduction of internet and web blogging also, which makes a bit easier for us. But the regime's policy is that one of my colleagues just mentioned a bit earlier about the military government's policy of attacking or countering media against the media. So they use a lot of propaganda organs, like their own state-run newspapers, previously there was quite crude, their methods were quite crude, but now they are most subtle way, and they set up some FM radio stations, and people like to listen to the rock pop music, and then with that rock music, whenever they tune into, they would interspersed with some of the articles we're taking, countering our reports and stuff like that. Just a few weeks ago, the Burmese information minister was in China, and then he was meeting. On the back page of the state-run newspaper said that while he was there, then he called on the propaganda czar of Chinese Communist Party, so he must have learned a few tricks from them as well. But looking to the future, then I think leading up to the 2010 elections, I would think that there would be more control and more tight censorship on the local publications, and then more propaganda from their side. But one encouraging sign is I just mentioned that Burmese people with their ingenuity, and they will in any way come over that one and then get the message across to us, and then we'll continue to cover that one, reporting back inside Burma and then telling outside what's really happening inside Burma.
Thank you very much indeed. How effective, this is a very crude question, how effective is that Burmese inside propaganda? I mean, in people's heads, where are they? There's sometimes the propaganda is just for itself. How?
It's not very effective, but
right.
When
it is backed up by fear.
Yeah,
so
backed up by fear, and then it's whenever they repeatedly saying something, and then but people are quite sort of becoming a bit more savvy, I think, like media savvy, and then they know what is actually right and what is the propaganda.
Thank you very much indeed. Sorry, I'll take some questions. Good.
I think it's a little difficult to get the IMF in when the regime insists on an official exchange rate of just over 6 chats to the dollar, when the real rate, which they accept in other respects, is over 1,000. The second point I make is I'm a little surprised that you think that an election would be fair. I wonder whether you think that the referendum was fair, because almost nobody else does. And the third point is really that I agree with you, I think, on the whole, that nothing much is going to happen for some time. But I don't think it's really sensible to believe that the army is prepared to let go control. I think they've given the chance of some slight reduction of control, but I don't think on past form it'll be likely that they will lose control. My only other points are that I think the atmosphere of fear is something which somebody like Derek, who's never lived in Burma, may not appreciate, and that the fear does indeed extend outside the frontiers of Burma. I went to the theatrical event yesterday, and I can well understand that those taking part were not prepared to take part. It is an atmosphere of fear. And my final point, because I've spoken too much, is that I was there from 88 to 90, and I didn't get the impression there was any likelihood of the army losing control then. It seemed to me that the army was in control from 1962 until today. There was a bit of a hiccup with the 1990 election, but it didn't really faze them much. They simply paid no attention to it. And I don't think that foreign intervention then would have done much good, and I don't know what it would have consisted of. I think it is for the Burmese on the whole to solve their own problems.
IMF still do go there once a year for consultations. I've only seen one of their reports in recent year, but every year they go, this question of the official exchange rate is one that they raise, and they raise with them. And the answer always is, we entirely understand, we entirely agree with you, but it has to be resolved at senior level. And so far it hasn't. Now, I have lived in countries where there have been differing exchange rates. And
between 6 and 1,000?
Oh yes, even worse than that.
Where?
Poland in 1955 and also in 68. Official rate 4 to the pound, unofficial rate 11 to the pound, free market rate 120, various other rates 200.
Like 1,000.
Yes, but remember this, Martin. The IMF need to resolve these problems, and unless you're allowed to go there and actually talk to people, you will never resolve them. And in practical terms, it doesn't matter a hoot, because they conduct their foreign trade in and their foreign accounts in US dollars, and the rest they do domestically. And having been an investor there, I can tell you we had two lots of account books, one at the official rate that was the authorities, and the other one the real rate that we are. Secondly, as far as the referendum concerned, I don't think you could have been listening to what I said, because I made it absolutely clear that I regarded the referendum as having been forced through as a military operation. Thirdly, as far as the elections are concerned, I was talking solely about what actually happens on the day, whether there will be massive rigging of the voting, and the answer to that is there won't be any need to, because it will already have been fixed beforehand. Again, I thought I'd made that completely clear. And the third thing is that because I've never lived in Burma, I don't understand what the people think. Believe me, I've lived in Vietnam where conditions were even worse than they are in Burma as far as military intelligence are concerned, where if you dared even talk to someone in the park, they were arrested straight away. I've also lived in Iron Curtain countries where exactly the same situation arose. And so, although I've never actually lived in Burma, and my Burmese is still very, very weak, I think I do understand precisely what they suffer and what they go through, and how terrified they must be of talking to anyone. And I base this on my experience in Vietnam, in Laos, in Cambodia, in South Africa even, and certainly in Poland and East Germany.
We are obsessed with Aung San Suu Kyi, but is it? Have it ever comes to through that? Maybe Aung San Suu Kyi or NLD's idea is really not very popular or deep-rooted in a Burmese mind. I'm not saying that the military junta's idea is extremely welcome, but for a general Burmese idea, maybe that's not. It's only from the Western perspective that because it's so good, looks so good, that's why. But maybe for people there, maybe that's not. And also you mentioned that the international aid in the Cambodia and compared to Burma, it's much less. But because I was in Burma last year for my field work, so it looked like for average general life in Burma, it's much more better because they have rich source. Really, so the question is that people here, how they perspective Burma, maybe not exactly the idea of people in Burma or Burmese people think about that.
Can I ask other members of the panel how distorted you think our view of Burma and Burmese, that's what you're really saying, that what we think of it, how you understand how we think of it, how distorted that is?
You mean the two Burmese? Yeah.
Yes, I think you should tell us. I think you should tell us.
It's quite hard because, for example, about 9 years ago, I was one of the Burmese monasteries there, and I met an acolyte, a German woman. We were having a conversation about love and kindness and meditation, and she asked me, "What religion are you?" And I said, "I'm a Burmese Catholic," and she's horrified. "You're Burmese, you mustn't be a Catholic, you have to be Buddhist." And then I tried to explain to her that although I'm a nominally Catholic and also member Catholic, my tradition, half of it is Buddhist. And she said, no, you can't do that, you have to be pure Buddhist. And I thought, Teutonic idea. But anyway, it's a bit like that when I see quite a lot of either people who are fanatic about supporting the Burmese or kind of trying to find something bad about Burma. Sometimes what they view is, because Aung San Suu Kyi for the media in the West is someone, perfect picture. And that is the thing. And I understand that, but I don't mean that she's only that, because in Burma is a country, you have to remember that 1885, the head of state was taken to India, wipe out the whole, not kill, I mean, the tradition of kingdom was taken out. So the Burmese have been feeling kind of parentless since 1885, if you think about it, emotionally. So, so in order to replace that, they've been trying to take the monk as a kind of head figure, but it wasn't successful because the British stopped the Burmese King Mindong from even coming to Rangoon to decorate the Shutagong Pagoda and the like. But anyway, after independence, they had to change into a different mode of having a figurehead. So there came Aung San. Unfortunately, he got killed very young. And then now Aung San's daughter came back. So for Burmese, she's a bit, unashamedly, a messiah she is. And the generals know it. And when they know it, they won't put her anywhere near to that kind of something similar to a chair. And so, so if you think that the 20 years, the past 20 years, the problem is a bit like that, I think, from the Burmese point of view, much less of a democratic thing, because for the generals, not only, I think much more to do with their wives, especially, they can't allow that woman on top of that chair. They can't do it, and that kind of thing. So it has that quite a lot of subtlety, sometimes not very subtle. So when you read what the West describes the Burmese political situation, as I said earlier on, either sanctions, the goodness of Suu Kyi, and the badness of the junta, and that I find this a bit sleepy when I hear these things. But when people go slightly further, just behind the curtain, and say, this is interesting, I met this general, he seems to like golf, and the like. It makes him more humane, I think, or human, not humane. But in the end, it all comes down to how much slots the Burma can have in the media each day, or because Burma only gets attention when more than 100,000 people got killed, or that kind of thing. And so it quite, that is how I see the West see it, but at the same time I can't stop it. So I have to take it with tongue in cheek, or sometimes I tell Burmese, or the people who don't know about Burma, I say, where is Burma? Somewhere north of Birmingham. And only then they will get interested in it. And that kind of thing. So you have to have it with a humor. And what's lacking in quite a lot of, including the Burmese political activists and the West, and also the Burmese army itself, is humor. That humor that doesn't, I don't mean Burmese don't have humor, they do have humor. But when you're trying to touch, even among our opposition group, when I try to tease someone in terms of their political ideologies, they think, oh, it is sacrilegious. So the reason for that is they've lost that figure in Burma, and the army is trying to get that before Suu Kyi and like. I think.
Thank you very much. That was a profound, actually, interpretation of Burmese history. How do you think we go?
Very quickly, in answer to her questions, that Aung San Suu Kyi stands up. Aung San Suu Kyi stands up against the regime, what the Burmese people can't do. That's why they look up to her. And then, since 1988, she has sacrificed a lot. And then people see that as something she has given away a lot for the country. And she is someone who can really squares up to the generals. No one else there. That's what she embodies is the people, what people want to see happen in the country. About the other people's, the outside people's perceptions, I think it also depends on who you talk to, who you associate with. Because I was in America in 2000, and I went to a lecture by a quite distinguished American professor. Sometimes she brought back a T-shirt with the pictures on there. T-shirt was about the 1996 Visit Myanmar Year T-shirt, and then she pulled it out and then showed that on the back of it, like in front of it is Visit Myanmar Year with the map of Burma, and in the back of it there's small, like the drawings of the ethnic group of people.
Yes.
in Burmese, she said, what she pointed out is that, look at that picture. When it described the Burmese people, then with nice head, gongbound, we call it, headgear, and with taipong properly. But look at the other ethnic people, then, it's like a caricature stuff like that. So that I did not agree with her, because, this is not the official policy. What she wanted to portray is that, this is the, Burmese people are suppressing the ethnic people. And I didn't agree with her, and I went up to her and then talked that, no, she said that, no, this is what I heard from the people that I talked to, I associated with, inside people. For example, I have no problem with, I'm a Burmese, with Pascal or any other. I have lots of friends of ethnic people. But sometimes I feel that, outside, or maybe what they want to do is that they want to side with those who they think are oppressed, which is a noble feeling. But sometimes it might cause, like, even uncomfortable feeling among ourselves as well. Are we oppressor of the ethnic people? No, actually, I never felt that. But the way that the other society or Western people also, not just Western, outside people also viewed Burma in some perspective, somehow, how they get the information, or how they, who they talk to, who they associate with.
Thank you very much. Peter Kelly.
I'd like to ask a hypothetical question, bearing in mind that we've heard a lot this evening about, as it were, soft power, BBC, education, aid, NGOs, and so on. Is the reason we're not hearing more about more aggressive means of intervention? Is it because they can't be done, or they shouldn't? So my hypothetical question is, just supposing there were some way in which, a la Sierra Leone or Kosovo, the West could directly intervene, overthrow the rulers and introduce democracy, would that be a good thing or a bad thing?
Well,
shall I?
No, I think can I just say really quickly, even for a hypothetical question, that's just not possible. There's just no way that could possibly ever happen, because as long as India and China's there, no one's going to. Even India or China can't do it. But, can you hear? Or but if in some imaginary world it could happen, and I'm not making fun of it, I'm just saying it would have to be an imaginary world. No, I don't think it would be a good thing. I don't think an invasion would resolve the problems, and I don't think invasions really resolve problems in Iraq or Afghanistan. And I think there's this related to outside intervention. When I said that maybe outside world should have done more in 1988, I didn't mean an armed intervention or incursion of anything of that nature. In fact, that would actually make the army stronger and help solidify people behind the army. But I think that there's this, when we invade, or when the West invades countries for other purposes, and then utilizes a vocabulary of liberation and promoting democracy and everything else, it raises false expectations that people in Burma, for example, will hear about, and because they don't know, they aren't always aware, because of limited information sources, how the world outside really works. And they see the U.S. stepping in to Iraq and Afghanistan, and they think that maybe they can do that in Burma, but it wouldn't resolve any problems, I don't think. It would just create more.
If I could just continue the thought about military intervention. This is a point at which I would have disagreed with Andrew Mitchell. At the time of, and this will please Martin, I'm sure, but at the time that the fleets turned up off the Burmese coast, there was the USS Essex that can take 10,000 people and is full of helicopters, accompanied by 3 other ships. There was the Le Mistral, a French amphibious assault vessel that can likewise take 2,000 commandos and had about 25 helicopters on board, and there was our own British ship. And meanwhile, in the United Nations, you had Bernard Kouchner going on about responsibility to protect, and he was saying, come hell or high water, tomorrow we're going in. He actually said that.
Yeah.
Whereupon the French Ministry of Defense said, sir, we quite understand. what are your rules of engagement? We are going to be fired on, as sure as eggs are heads. Do we fire back? And it was at that point that Bernard Kouchner realised that he'd gone perhaps a bit too far. Now, as far as the military are concerned, they saw this assembled armada. They were on the point of throwing out international NGOs because they thought there was some kind of Western intervention. George Yeo came back from North Korea, went at once in to see the Burmese and persuaded them to lay off. And it wasn't so much the Chinese who were responsible, it was ASEAN. And if you're ever looking for an example of how ASEAN policy of engagement has helped, it was certainly over Cyclone Nargis. It's also, I think, quite clear that when these ships appeared, although they didn't suppose there was going to be an invasion, they did think there was going to be a provocation. They did think it quite likely, and even I thought it 50% likely, that helicopters would go in. A bit like, you know, one of the Vietnam scenes. Heaven only knows what they would have done, but Bernard Kouchner wanted to do this. He hadn't thought it through. He hadn't realized that the Burmese, in fact, the military actually stopped their relief work, such as it was, and deployed defensively for about 48 hours because they thought that something was going to happen. Fortunately, it didn't. Martin no doubt wants to say something.
To support what you said and add something to it, in 1988, my American colleague, the American ambassador, was summoned in great agitation to the foreign ministry and said, what is this American fleet doing in Burmese waters? And it was, in fact, in waters which the Americans regarded as their own and the Burmese thing, and it had a helicopter on board ready to evacuate the American embassy in case there was trouble. So that's an extra reason why the Burmese were windy in the manner that Derek described. So for once I agree with Derek.
We've got to, I think, wind up. I would just like to take two more questions. There's lots more questions. Okay, can I take a sort of round of questions? And then we'll round up by you ending perhaps with our two.
Okay.
So be very, very disciplined. Ask the question and pass it back.
Okay, my question is really about the peripheral areas of Burma and the counterinsurgency, quote-unquote, pacification campaigns that are supposedly intensifying there in the run-up to the elections. What news do we have about that, and what ramifications does it have in light of other events in the Bay of Bengal region recently?
No, it's just about the economy, really. I was there back in February, and I was in Qatar, actually, and I saw the gulf between Yangon and the rest of the countryside. I don't think that there's really any real support for Aung San Suu Kyi. In the countryside, people are just living another world, basically. And I don't think the IMF has got any, game to play there, because it's a cash economy, really. They conduct their trade in the barter things, China and India. And the rest just don't give a toss about pleasing the international community. That was my experience, and I think that's shared by other colleagues who have been there recently.
My question was about the elections next year. NLD has said that they're going to boycott the elections. So who actually is going to take part in being against military junta? And the second part of the question was, with recent sort of insurgent activity in the Wa area of Shan State recently, do you see this as becoming more, happening a lot more in the lead up to the elections? And do you think this could possibly affect them in some way?
Yeah, just a question regarding dialogue that we're about to go into now, which is, potentially a good thing. Dialogue, in its very nature, when dealing with the junta, will mean compromise from both sides. With regards to the issue of political prisoners, of which there are 2,119 currently today incarcerated in Burma, what role will that issue take with regards to dialogue over the coming months? Because surely it should be an issue that is, they should be released now, before dialogue even starts.
I wanted to raise, firstly, very briefly, the situation in the ethnic areas. The gross human rights violations that are taking place, rape as a weapon of war, forced labour, use of human minesweepers, child soldiers, and I could go on with a longer list. Do you believe that those amount to crimes against humanity, and that at very least a commission of inquiry should be set out to investigate them, and potentially a prosecution at the ICC? And then I also just very briefly wanted to, I didn't want to wade into the conversation between the two former ambassadors, but I wanted to, because they were doing very well themselves, but I wanted just to very briefly come back to this point about the ADB. Derek, do you not think that if the ADB was allowed back in, the very first thing they would do is throw lots of money behind dams and infrastructure projects that only benefit the regime, and worse than that, actually result in the displacement of thousands of people, flooding of villages, and human rights abuses that go with it?
Just in connection with Ben's comments there, I mean, I think we ought to be aware of the report by Richard Goldstone that came out earlier this year in May 2009. Richard Goldstone is the probably leading prosecutor of the Rwanda Tribunal and the Yugoslav Tribunal, and also did the report on Gaza, which hopefully will go to the Security Council. He was quite unequivocal. These millions of people, and they do amount to millions of people internally and externally displaced in Burma, certainly amounts to crimes against humanity, which justifies a referral to the UN Security Council and justifies the setting up of a special tribunal or a referral to the International Criminal Court. And it seems as though Burma is entering now a final state of reckoning. Either the Burmese people get co-opted into this manipulated election, which will legitimize this junta virtually forever, or there is the possibility that a challenge could be mounted to this regime, a legal challenge, not an invasion, a legal challenge could be mounted to this regime, which would establish finally that they are pariahs and they are committing crimes against humanity. And I slightly regretted not intervening earlier when the minister said this is not an R2P situation. Richard Goldstone, the leading jurist in the world, has said these amount to crimes against humanity, and crimes against humanity triggers responsibility to protect. And if we'd established that these were crimes against humanity before Nargis had taken place, an intervention during the Nargis cyclone would not just have been legitimate, it would have been required.
That's an awful lot of questions. If you could, if we go Derek and then Michael, then Pascal this way. And Adit, if you can answer them in a general sort of way.
Yes, I think what I'd like to say is that I regard the ethnic issues in Burma as being fundamental to the future of the country, and indeed even more important than the question, the issues of democracy and all that. I think this issue needs to be resolved. I think it is a very serious issue, and I would, as I said, I regard it as more important, in fact, than the issues of democracy and political rights. Secondly, as far as Aung San Suu Kyi is concerned, I would accept that in the countryside at large, there is very little interest in her nowadays, but she has been put back on the world scene because of what has happened recently. You know, whether you like it or not, she has appeared, and the Burmese have made terrible mistakes in this respect, in allowing her, you know, very substantial internal publicity, including reports in newspapers, she's appeared on television, and so on and so forth. So whereas she was quietly fading away, she's now come back onto the world stage, and she is there. And she's going to use it for as much as she can. Now, as far as crimes against humanity are concerned, quite honestly, I'm not a legal expert, and my own view would be of no particular interest this way or that. But I would say that I notice that the British government are watching this very carefully indeed, and I do rather suspect that in their heart of hearts they do accept that there are crimes against humanity, but they don't know how to push this through the Security Council, how to persuade the Chinese and the Russians that there is a case to answer. So it's essentially a political question rather than a legal one, and I don't see any answer to it. But what I would say is that, and I'm sure you don't need my encouragement to continue to press this as hard as you can.
I think in terms of ethnic problems, this is a long-term problem that goes all the way back to, even constitutionally goes back to the introduction of diarchy. And no government has satisfactorily resolved these problems. But it is true that in the past 20 years, it's gotten incredibly worse. And 4 cuts does amount to crimes against humanity, the results of that. And I guess one of the big questions I have is how much the provisions in the new Constitution, that's one of the big things that argues against it. Once they put this Constitution in it, legally, at least within Burma, it forgives every military officer who's ever committed a crime against humanity, moved a village, slaughtered people, whatever. So that's a big problem. And the situation with Aung San Suu Kyi, what was the exact gist of the question regarding Aung San Suu Kyi, her position? And
it was really that she was of no significance in the wider Burmese context.
I don't think that's
an urban and Western preoccupation. Really, that was the question.
Yeah. I don't think that. I don't think that's true. I think she is important for more than just being a symbol. As long as she's around, there's at least some chance that they can pressure the military to take more consideration about the people as a whole. And as long as the people remain poor, she's still going to be pushing. But I think that there's also a complexity of this issue that we didn't talk about here, and there's Aung San Suu Kyi herself and her more, what might be a more evolving pragmatic approach to the military, to the relationship with the military and the new constitution, and Aung San Suu Kyi as we understand her, and that's an uncomplicated, unproblematized understanding that may be sometimes mobilized in ways that she herself would not want to be mobilized. What was the order? Okay.
I think go, yes.
Oh, we ordered that. Okay. Well, I had one of the. Okay. Can I put this down? Thanks.
I mean, regarding ethnic cleansing or if not, whatever is described, I think I describe the way the Burmese military government has been treating ethnic groups from 1962 to this day as Pol Pot in slow motion. And that is the thing that I always feel as an ethnic person, and also what I've seen. And that problem could be stopped if the military really, or any government that's going to be in charge of the country, declare a national or nationwide ceasefire. The reason is, if you are doing the same like the generals are doing now, is what they're doing is they are forcing smaller groups to lay down the weapons, and they won't touch the big ones yet. And what they've done is they complicate it by letting each group attack each other. And in general, I think that will have more problems for any government that's going to rule Burma in the future. So it won't be solved straight away. But it needs only sincerity, because ethnic groups feel that they have to be able to either give us independence or accept as one of your groups. That's what their attitude is in general. But the thing is, they are unable to really push the agenda, I think, because most of the time any country, including the UK, in the power, won't want ethnic groups to have independence, partly because it doesn't suit anyone, especially in Asia, and that kind of situation. And the other thing, regarding Aung San Suu Kyi, I don't think Aung San Suu Kyi is not insignificant. I think she becomes significant, but no one dares to talk about it, because whoever supported her been in trouble 100%. So therefore, you would never say her name or the lady anymore. And the interesting thing is, recently I heard an army officer, certain rank, but I won't say who, he said that even including in the army, 80% of the rank and file, apart from the top bit, we always watch Aung San Suu Kyi and always encourage her, and whenever she has that fight, because being soldiers like that kind of fair fight, they said, and whenever Suu Kyi has done something, they say, God, she's done that. Well, we dare not do anything because we live under order. So it's very, I don't think whether the generals try to assassinate her or trying to defame her like they've done. They will not succeed, but they will succeed in trying to delay her becoming more and more powerful. I think that's the thing. And the last point is, I think, when Andrew Mitchell was saying that China doesn't want to interfere with other affairs, I think that's hypocrisy, because they interfere in the Burmese affair by selling guns and also buying gas from the country. And that is, including the Burmese, when I talk to some ex-army officers in some part, they say our enemy is, we say the West, but our eyes are always to the East. So that is a kind of thing that's going on underneath the diplomatic words and the like.
Yeah, the military's treatment of the ethnic minorities and ethnic people is appalling. And we speak to a lot of people, displaced people who fled to the border, and then their plight is so appalling and very heartbreaking stories there. So, and in answer to one of the gentlemen there is that NLD did not say as yet that they would downright boycott the elections. And they have laid out the demands or the conditions for the Shui Kung Tai Declaration. Earlier mentioned that initially what they wanted is, the core thing is the 2008 Constitution, which would guarantees the military's continued hold on to power. There are undemocratic elements, and there are loads of undemocratic elements. So what NLD wanted is that let's talk, let's talk and iron out the differences, and then let's talk. If we have that kind of opportunities, we will consider to contest the elections. And someone mentioned about the political prisoners. Yes, when we interview the NLD official there, what minimal goodwill gestures they want to see before the dialogue actually starts is the release of political prisoners. Right away, they should not have been in prison in the first place.
I can actually reiterate that from the words of Wu Tin, I never said exactly the same.
Okay, yeah, so the political prisoner issue is still very important for the NLD as well. And about the offensive in ethnic areas, the one you asked about, what's the latest, that the generals or the military regime want all the ceasefire groups to transform into border guard force. And the deadline they have given them is this end of this month, October 31st. Some groups already agreed to that their demands, and then some still resisting. And for example, we have to watch what the ethnic war would respond to that pressure, whether that's the strongest and most well-equipped ethnic army currently standing. So until now, Wa has been saying that we're resisting that pressure. But how long can they, because Pascal just mentioned about the regime's tactic is that if they can't tackle or attack head-on an ethnic group, what their tactic is to split within themselves, and then let the splitting group fight against the previous group, which we saw in the KNU and Parent and Democratic Parent Buddhist armies. Sad situation happening there. Yeah, let's see.
I'd like to thank all of our panel very much for a very interesting evening, and I think we will come back to this sometime next year when we will see where we are. Thank you all very much for coming, and thank you very much indeed for a very interesting evening.